Welcome to the Mischief Maker broadcast, where chaos, creativity, and common sense collide. Your host, Joel Freeman, was kicked out of high school in Alberta, Canada. He left home at 17 and hitchhiked around North America as a long-haired hippie and dope-smoking fool. He made a 180-degree change, becoming one of the first chaplains in the history of the NBA. As a professional speaker, Joel has traveled to well over 55 countries. His many books have been published in 28 foreign translations. Pieces from his Black History collection have been seen by millions at the United Nations and many other venues. And now, the Chief Mischief Maker himself, Dr. Joel A. Freeman.
Hey guys, Baby Joel here. Guess what? The older version of me told a joke over a Zoom meeting last week, but nobody laughed. Turns out, he's not remotely funny.
Well, Baby Joel always tells the truth, and so we'll try not to tell any jokes remotely funny tonight. That's a double negative, but we'll go with it. I have on my shoulder here something that is very exciting to share. This is the Jack Johnson belt. And I think I got it upside down, so that's a good start. But maybe get to do some handstands. This is the Jack Johnson belt. It's a legacy belt. We're very grateful that Jack lived on this planet. He was a world heavyweight champion from 1908 to 1915. And I just felt it's about time that we have something for Jack that helps to educate the younger generation who may have never heard of him, and also to provide a gateway for people who are in the older generation who say, yeah, I know who Jack Johnson is. I know his exploits. I know the fight of the century in Reno, Nevada, July 4th, 1910, but they don't know he was a spy. They don't know he opened up in Barcelona, Spain, an ad agency. They don't know that he fought bulls in Spain and Mexico. They don't know that he defeated the wrestling champion of Norway. But that's not our point tonight. Our point tonight is that I want you to know about it. And when you go to the QR code above, that'll take you to our link tree, chiefmischiefmaker.com. That's the website. And there you'll meet our guest tonight. His name is Dennis Rebelo, Dr. Dennis Rebelo. That's his website. Just put a DR in front of his name.com, and you'll go straight to his website if you want to hire him as a speaker or want to help him or have him help you with your story. And so the whole idea of constructing a narrative about yourself with the intention and the purpose of something that is just you've never experienced quite before, and to dive into the intricacies of story pathing. This is something that Dennis has created, this whole idea of story pathing and becoming the master of your own narrative, and then reaping the benefits of telling your story and who you truly are. Now, this is something that a younger generation who is constantly head in their cell phones and maybe at a mixer, not quite sure, maybe awkward, socially awkward, not sure how to tell their story. If someone has 30 seconds, what is the person going to say about themselves? Maybe you're a grandparent. We have people around the world that are watching from Japan and Germany and Australia, India, Canada, United States, UK, all over the place. And so whenever you're watching this, whether it's live tonight or on a podcast format, and you're a grandparent and you have a story to tell, this is an important show for you. He's worked with pro athletes and entrepreneurs, CEOs, and all kinds of folks, all across the spectrum of jobs and areas of expertise. He's the co-founder of the Sports Mind Institute, resides in Western Massachusetts. And before we bring him on, I have a song for you that I think is germane to our topic tonight. It's called Empty the Library Within. Listen to the lyrics. It's a song I wrote about, probably about a year ago or so, and produced it. Here it is.
small town, a dreamer with big eyes. Joined the Air Force, saw the world from unfriendly skies. He was curious, studied hard, read books of every kind. Amassed a wealth of knowledge, but kept it all confined. In lands far and wide, in the vigor of his youth, life hit Bobby hard and he remained aloof. He kept quiet about his stories from K to Gray. Late in life he opened up, as Bobby would like to say. Unpack your inner library, next generation needs to know. Release your hidden treasures, you got seeds to sow. The world needs your stories, both the bad and the good. Empty the library within, you should, you could, you could, if you would. He watched the rise of nations, the fall of ancient walls, saw little hope in the chaos, heard the silent calls. But all of life's adventures, both seen and heard, remained his hidden library with chapters burned. Now let me ask you gently, what wisdom will you reveal? What nuggets of gold, what tales of tempered steel? Bobby took stock of his life, his counsel in demand. What a shock, he opened up so others could understand. Unpack your inner library, next generation needs to know. Release your hidden treasures, you got seeds to sow. Write a book, tell your stories, both the bad and the good. Empty the library within, you should, you could, you could, if you would. So take a look inside, I hope you'll agree to use all types of media for the world to hear and see. Pass on your godly wisdom, leave a legacy. Don't wait for life's conclusion to share what you've amassed. Each day's a new chapter, don't let the moment pass. Your journey holds the answers to questions yet unasked. Step outside your comfort zone, leave a legacy that lasts. You could if you would, if you would.
There we are. Empty the library within. Let's bring on Dr. Dennis Rebelo.
Wow.
Welcome.
What a song. What a song, Joel. Dr. Joel, what a song. I mean, so appropriate too to start our work together. Really appreciate the meaningful operational pause to take that song in, the lyrics and the visuals. Man, I'm all yours. So let's get it. Let's do this Mischief Maker thing.
Well, tell us a little bit about yourself in terms of what shaped you in your early years about wanting to get involved in storytelling, the narrative, and helping other people. First, I'm sure you did a lot of work on your own story and understanding some of the good, the bad, and the ugly of your life and what you've experienced and how to package that or try to figure that out, and then helping others.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, Joel, I was fascinated by complexity. whether it were a BMX bike jump, in the 80s, the early 80s when BMX was pre-X Games, understanding how to teach others how to jump their bike, or when I dove into physics experiments in my basement at 15 and built holograms so that I could understand better how a laser could be used to create an image on a glass plate. I've always been fascinated with the complex, and there's nothing more complex than human beings discerning a sense of self, right? And I've watched people either in the steel business that my dad ran or in my community in Rhode Island when I was growing up. And as I traveled, as I was a young hard science kid, I watched people struggle with explaining who they were. So I always, and I interviewed, by the way, to answer your question, I interviewed my grandparents, my great grandparents. I came from a place where that bike I was jumping over, sort of obstacles with, and racing around BMX tracks. I also used to pedal my way over to my vovó, my vovô, that's Portuguese for grandfather and grandmother, and their parents. So I had the really strange environment growing up in Cumberland, Rhode Island, of being able to bike to grandparents who were immigrants and their parents, and be able to unpack their stories. I was a curious kid. And I wanted to make sense of life, and I was probably quiet about how I did it at the beginning, but just like a good physics equation sheds some light on a complex physical phenomenon, the phenomenon of becoming can have a narrative formula, and that's what I kind of broke down in my book, Story Like You Mean It, is getting I think Forbes said it's a narrative formula that will make, if you're, your next public speaking event 1,000 times more fun, I think is what they said, if I'm getting it right. I'll have to look up the Forbes piece, but and that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to make it accessible, an accessible formula for folks to not just do a quick pitch, right? We talk about elevator pitches, but have a life story that has a past, a now, and a future. And narrative, I use synonymous with story, but narrative is your story over time. It's not a moment in time. That's a story. So there are stories that comprise your narrative, right? And then you can find a theme, a thread, and create a plot line. And breaking that down in a fun way that a 15-year-old kiddo could do in a dual enrollment class at a university, or somebody 87 years old wishing to kind of look back at their life and pass on a legacy story, as your song intimates. So I think there's a really, I really appreciate your setup before you asked the question that I just gave you a really long answer to, because narrative is something that's a sense-making mechanism, right? So whether it's an interview, a life transition, why did you move to Western Mass from Southern Rhode Island? Why did you move to the Carolinas from Maryland or wherever? There's people have to narrate, and that process, even with successful CEOs that I interviewed in nonprofit leaders in my formal research, they didn't know how to do it well. They got flooded with all the moments that they thought that they should share with the person in front of them based on all of these bits and sort of possible connections for quote unquote common ground. But the common ground to me is not necessarily what you want to hear. That might be an anticipated sort of faux bridge, FAUX, to just make a transactional connection versus something that is an internalized story. And ultimately, Joel, what I realized, if I didn't help people tell their story, people would make up the story for the person, and that's no good, because many times we thin slice or rapidly form opinions that aren't serving of another human being. And if we're going to create, bridging social capital, we need to get better at the storytelling muscle in a way that makes sense.
Mel has said, "Me too, Dennis. I taught complexity and leadership decision making at the graduate level, and I spent 6 weeks at the Santa Fe Institute for the study of chaos." Any response to that? By the way, folks watching this evening, one of the benefits of being alive on live and on a Wednesday evening is because you get to ask questions. Those in the podcast, sorry, got to take what we got. But so please share your questions with Dr. Dennis Rebelo. And what are your thoughts on that for Mel?
Yeah, well, I think, look, I mean, if I were to make sense out of Mel's narrative, I'd have to think about his life, 0 to 13, 0 to 18. And I wonder what Mel, I'm not asking Mel to answer this question per se, but I'd be curious to ask Mel, what about your life was formative first, not trying to back tie complexity to your life. So, I call it in my book, I call it blue dots. A blue dot is a formative experience where there's a self-event connection. And just being reverent to that and learning how to unpack it with the system that we provide in the book. It's basically a storytelling guide. The book's not really about me. It's about you and helping you unpack your story. But I'd go back in Mel's story and find out something that was formative and not try to make it a force fit to complexity or leadership. Then I would look at something, and I would look at something specifically, Joel, that was heroic, something where he saved himself by being adaptable, by being communicative, by maybe being creative, whatever it would be. And then I would, oh yeah, look at this. Thanks, Mel. I emphasize the lack of subjectivity in big data and how it leads to you, George. Oh, wow. So then, and then I would eventually get to collaborative moments and then virtuous work. So I think he probably collaborated a lot with organizations, because as I understand, Mel's narrative was about leading an executive MBA program. And you have to be collaborative with industry and your students, especially since at that point, it's not about pedagogical orientation as a professor, it's about andragogy, right? You have to understand that the person shows up with lived experiences who's in your class as an adult, and teaching that person is a collaborative effort. So in the book, we talk about hero dots are the base of the triangle. We actually have something here. We talk about, hero dots are the base of the triangle. We talk about collaborative dots where you're more in relationship with other, and we talk about virtuous dots. These are past, these are near now, these are future possible, but informed by past. And in the book, we have folks, we encourage them to look at 3 on each level and go through some exercises that allow them to take a dot and look at what comprises a dot, which is a person, or maybe just you by yourself if you're experiencing something alone, but the types of people around you, the power of place, motivations, and what kind of competencies or mental muscles. This is sort of like an old school transparency, Joel, that sits on top of the dot and helps you unpack the dot, because those are, the constituents or ingredients of a dot. And so really what I'm teaching people is how to be a phenomenologist in many ways, how to unpack meaning in one's life, right, through their subjective lived experiences. The most difficult part of this process, however, is holding yourself back. When I coach somebody who has their MBA and is in, say, medical sales or life sciences, they really want to be able to hurry up and get the story done, right? And it's like, whoa, you've got to bathe in the raw material of your story, right? It's about first excavation, and as my wife Shannon says, then creation, and then performance. But if you were to divide it up, it's way more than a third about excavation, and then maybe less than a third about creativity, conjuring up the connection point of those dots, past, now, future, to then create a performance that really comes from multiple variations. You have to do multiple reps, just like in sports. Yeah, we're a family of educators over here. We're all about helping people tell the story, but there's definitely like terms from education that we can steal from, like scaffolding and front loading, right, and looping and all that other jazz, so to speak.
Kelly is asking, how do we uncover retrospective falsification in how we remember events?
Yeah, so well, that's such a dense and languaged question. So first and foremost, thanks, Kelly, for the question. How do we uncover retrospective falsification? So I think it's really, so one of the ways we orient to that is that, so what I'm thinking Kelly is referring to, and Kelly, feel free to correct me if I'm off on this, is that we remember falsely sometimes what is real. And that might be because people are around us are telling us this, or because we maybe it felt better for us to resolve it, or maybe we just didn't know some elements. So going back in time and looking at a key experience. It might be like one time I had someone talk about moving to another part of the world. They didn't understand the language. They didn't have a choice. They were a firstborn child. in a military family, and the military family had to move, and and they had a conjuring up of why they were adaptable, that once they went to the lived experience, they realized, yeah, right, recency really does often override memory, along with bias. So the neat part about the way we work through this, or encourage folks to do so, is to go and unpack that moment again. And that retrospective analysis of it, right, is much more objective, observer oriented. I'll give you a bit from Husserl. So Husserl is a German philosopher. For those of you who aren't fans of German philosophy, he essentially created a methodology of thinking about the world that was really helped study the mind through subjective lived experiences, encourage consciousness coming from going back to the moment in time. His teacher, Brentano, who was a priest, said you could be conscious of the experience while you were in the experience. But if you think about it, even learning to teach a class, run a podcast, run a jazz show, learn a different language, learn how to read a particular type of text. If you go back in time, or even going to a doctor for the first time to experience, or to the dentist, if you go back in time and you write about going to the dentist for the first time, and you do it once, you'll remember a certain amount of information, like what chair was nearby, right? And then if you go back for the second time, you'll unpack even more. You'll become more conscious of the moment, like, oh, the receptionist, or the person next to you, or the old man who you helped get into his seat, who had a walker. And so you start to unpack more and more. So as you go back in time, you tend to discover more of the nuances. And Husserl said that to the extent that you go back in time over and over and over again, you can actually get a really nice picture of that. So I really like that that comment about recency. So we go back so we don't get fooled by recency. So Freud said, according to Candy, thank you, Candy, well, we don't forget, we disremember, which is far more purposeful. Well, yes, Freud also said that the best means of coping is deletion, which is very similar. And I couldn't agree with you more. If you want to get through something, forget about the thing. But that is certainly one way to do it. I practice more of the humanistic orientation. These are great questions and great insights. I really love them. So returning to, again, the self-identified event connection, right? These are self-event connections that I'm not telling you, Joel's not telling you, Mel's not telling you, Candy's not telling you. You're telling you that this had some sort of significance, one of these three story types. And then you investigate, you explore, you excavate, and that process itself, through the exercises in the book, helps unveil meaning. It's almost like dusting off leaves from something hidden in the yard by some brush, some debris, and you're like, wow, I do remember that starfish when I was a kid, and how all of the cousins played on the rocks by the seaside town in South Kingston. You just discover more when you slow play those memories in the unpack. But you have to get there. And so that can be challenging for people in a rapidly sort of moving world that's hyper entangled and super complex. So back to you, Joel. That was a lot of answering questions.
Oh, that was great. And I want to step back to when you were, you had this thought in your mind to interview your grandparents, and you had the ability, living in a situation where you could get on your bike and go over there. Was that an external idea you heard about someone doing this, or you came up with it with yourself, from yourself? And what did you do with that? What kind of questions did you ask them? Were they reticent about some questions? Did you ask any uncomfortable questions? And what did you do with that information?
Well, these are all. I mean, these are great sort of scrapes at my life. So thanks for unpacking me a little bit. The flip is in. Yeah, I feel it. So I would say that it was not external, but it was informed by what I heard. I think I probably, we like the truth, right? And to get to the truth, you have to think, is the thing I'm hearing true? Mm-hmm. So I didn't hear a lot other than, so from my Portuguese relatives, hey, they came over from Portugal. It was Beta Alta. It was northern Portugal. Then I started to think about like, well, what was that like for my grandfather Jose? Like, what did he do when he got here? How was he registered? Was he come over as a farmer? He never farmed. How could that be? So I listened to what I heard, sometimes in Portuguese, sometimes in English, and then I thought, is this true? And then I had to gently unpack because I really didn't know what I was doing. Right, I was a young kid. I was like 10 years old. So I didn't really know what I was doing. I just was curious, and I was nice to them and they were nice to me. And remember, your grandparents aren't your parents, so they don't tell you, hey, listen, I got things to do, kid. They tend to have more patience with you, thankfully. So they're like a good client, right? And or a starter client. And so they were really, the kinds of questions I asked were really to understand what their experiences were like. I didn't know that I was doing this. I didn't know that I was reaching for, like, how did they become the person who they are? I didn't think of this at all. Like, is this some sort of like exploring the becoming of an individual or individuation? Oh, Gladwell blank. Yeah, on the tipping point. Yeah, the thin slicing, absolutely. Yeah. So I remember citing, so James has asked this question. Do you want to state the question, or do you want me to just answer it, Joel?
Two books that had a tremendous impact on me. This is James speaking. By Malcolm Gladwell is Blink and the Tipping Point, that speaks to thin slicing, which you mentioned. Can you elaborate?
Yeah. So thin slicing in the context of Gladwell's work was really about rapidly formed opinions that could be right, could be wrong, right? In many cases, whether you're looking at an ivory, you know, figurine, you could figure out a fake if you were an expert in understanding this particular material, but in reality, human beings are not very expert at thin slicing one another. They don't really form an archetypal, an accurate archetypal imprint from seeing somebody, right? Like if I roll in with a bow tie, as I present white because my skin is fairly white, slightly toned, but like maybe a little tanny looking, but I'm white, I'm a male, I'm wearing a bow tie. If I go into a manufacturing plant and I want to talk about, let's see, human competencies and human skills, and how to be able to relate with more efficacy, people look at me and they say, oh, this guy has just never worked a day in his life. They don't think I grew up, sweeping around in an acetylene oxygen cutter at American Steel and Aluminum while I was, in school, and that I understand people because my family many of them came from another country. So for me to be thin sliced, actually, in many cases, for anyone to be thin sliced, is to remove a lot of what they have in that library within, as your song points out, right? So it's not necessarily the onlooker's fault per se, although it would be nice if they were more curious. But again, the rapidity of the pace that we keep as human beings today doesn't necessarily dictate that we become curious. So it's really important to be curious, ask questions, but it's also important and incumbent upon us as human beings to take stock of our own life stories, our narratives, those self-event connections, and then to sort them to really create our own archetypal pattern of who we are. And so if I'm a pioneer quester for the good of others, or a teacher's teacher, or an advocate for folks without a voice, like I should, or a caregiver with no rev limiter, in other words, no stop, like I'm going to give care all the way through, then like that is formed by examining the key moments in my life. And that allows me to then proactively speak to my narrative and self-narrate, which is a very difficult thing without some sort of adaptable structure, which goes to the point why I actually wanted to write the book. And my publisher, thought that I should be, and some PR people wanted me to write it for finance people and people who could pay me a lot of money to teach finance people how to get more assets under management, right? And assets under management, AUM, is a big deal if you're if you're in the financial space, but I didn't want to just use it for sales of
Mm-hmm.
financial services. I wanted Hannah Ung, who came from Cambodia, to tell her story and then be able to, navigate college as someone who came into the United States and not really understand why she was here or how to get where she wanted to go. Well, she followed the formula as a dual enrollment student and ended up going to 3 countries in 2.5 years, had a $20,000 per year unrestricted scholarship from the Rhode Island Foundation because as she told me, hey, Doc, I told my story, I got a $20,000 scholarship. I said, that's great, Hannah. She said, yeah, it's unrestricted. I said, any school? She said, yeah. She said, and it's for 4 years. Well, said, Hannah, that's $80,000,
Wow.
So, but if you thin sliced Hannah or me or you, Joel, or some of the sports folks that I've supported, you would make up a story that wouldn't be the story. Right. And so I think that, to just put a punctuation mark on the answer for James, thin slicing happens because it helps us typically, but we don't really do a good job of it as human beings. So if we know that about the world, and we know that people will form an opinion and then orient themselves off of this misinformation, we need to do something about it as human beings. We need to learn our own narrative, first for internal consumption, decision making, and guidance, but then also so other people can orient to us in a way that serves us and them in the role in which we're sitting.
We're going to take a break with our sponsor, but before we do, I want to tease the coming back to hear more from Dr. Dennis Rebelo. I'm going to ask him about how we deal with shameful aspects as we're in the excavation process, and what do we do with that information, and do we share it, and if so, how much with the next generation? Right now, we're going to take a break. Our sponsor is the Rosetta Universe. And you're going to hear from a very interesting historical character named General Manu. Mel?
Hey guys, Bigger Baby Joel here. Guess what? Hey guys.
A huge rock with strange inscriptions had been found by the Nile. And when I saw it, I knew that the inscriptions were going to unlock the secrets of the ancient Egypt. Yes, we lost the Egyptian military campaign, but I was never going to give the Rosetta Stone to the British. I was angry when they took it from me. Help the Rosetta Stone Traveling Exhibit Project transform an ancient artifact, the Rosetta Stone, into a modern metaphor for problem solving. You'll never regret it.
Well, Bigger Baby Joel tried to interject himself there, and we were able to quash him down just a little bit so that General Manu could speak. Now, General Manu, very quickly, he was about 5'5", very compact, swarthy man who was mercurial emotionally. And at one point, at the time of capitulation to the British, he had the Rosetta Stone in his grasp. I mean, it was with him in his tent in Alexandria. And he was so intent on bringing that back to France that he was willing to destroy the face of the Rosetta Stone in order so that no one else could enjoy it and appreciate it and respect it. So we have something called the Rosetta Universe that I'm developing, and it's developing well, I'm not going to go into it, because if you go to the QR code above me, if you're on a laptop or a desktop, it'll take you straight to a website called chiefmischiefmaker.com. It's 3 words, chiefmischiefmaker.com. You'll actually bump into Dr. Dennis Rebelo. You'll see his wonderful face, and just click on his face. It'll take you straight to his website. And but that is, we're transforming this ancient artifact into a modern metaphor for problem solving and critical thinking. And I think that once you start wrapping your head around this particular project, you'll come up with some ideas and some advice and some wisdom for me. And that's all. Well, I have a wide open gateway for anyone that has anything to share. We'll come back to you, Dr. Dennis Rebelo. You're in Western Massachusetts.
Yes.
Folks who are listening live, you're welcome to share any questions, comments that you might have that are germane to the topic at hand. And we'll get to you, Doug, in just a second, but I want to fulfill my promise to ask a question about shameful aspects when someone is excavating in their past, and they may remember something shameful that happened to them or something shameful that they did on their own. How do they share that? How do they wrap their brain around it and their heart around it? And is that useful in as a legacy, part of the legacy for the next generation?
Well, it's a great question, and it has come up over and over again, right? When someone has so in private session, if we have 21 executive coaches and career coaches, soon to be 23, and if you go to narrativeresearchgroup.org, you can see more about really how we teach people how to use these tools that are in the book, but also pair folks with coaches or assign coaches for on-site work if it's not me, because part of my legacy is passing on the tools that we've created. And it's a 501c3, so Narrative Research Group is a tax-exempt 501c3 nonprofit. So just give that for what it is. In terms of shameful stories, in the work when it's individualized, or in group, that does come up, Joel, that folks will bounce into a moment and they realize that there's a lot there. We don't get in the way of that unpacking. We let the person do their work, right? Because they've self-identified. So we believe in autonomy, right? We believe in self-determination and self-determinism as a part of the process, right? We're out of the way. You give them the apparatus for excavating and assembling the narrative. However, there are times where you have to flatten parts of the story, right? So when you contextualize it, I think this phrase is better than contextualizing. When you feed it into an environment, how will it serve me is a good question. So, if I talk about how I was shamed as in an English language learner, like an ESL is what they called it at the time. They put me into that class with Rodriguez, Santos, and others because they saw Rebello and they said, oh, this is a Portuguese kid. He doesn't know English. There were a lot of other kids who couldn't speak English. However, they didn't realize I could speak English and understand English. So they were saying, the teachers on my first day of school, lots of negative things about my people, if you will. So now would I tell that story? That's not like something like abuse per se. But it was, I cried as a young kid. I'm 6 years old. I thought it was, kind of a mean thing to say about my family. I couldn't figure it out. But it might not belong, right? It might not belong in a particular self-narration. Why? Because it might be like an ornament to the story. It might be part of language that I use to convey. It might be an on-ramp to story. Like I've always been interested in why people limit people's learning. And I might use it there, but I might not tell that whole story. Now, unless I put meaning on it, then I might tell the whole story. I mean, heck, I'm telling it now, so it had some meaning in my life. And so we talk about flattening stories in the case of where somebody has resolved, maybe somebody was aggressive towards them and virtually abusive or abusive. Obviously we do run into these cases where people have resolved their own sort of issues with those types of experiences, and they sought therapy or mitigated the situation, but it is an important part of them. So it's resolved both psychologically per se, legally per se, in a family per se. It's figured out in a family context, but they still don't like it, but they want to reference it. So we teach them how to flatten that. And flatten it started with a guy named Cortese started doing this work. Flattening narrative is not to belittle it, but it's to leave out elements. So I might say, at times I've reached points where I've seen, teachers not act so well in my own life. I saw teachers limit people and thin slice people based on last name and vowels. And it's very limiting. And as a young person, you might not know all that's going on, but it does interfere with the way in which you orient yourself to the world. And so, yeah, shame and guilt are very two parts. So I'm reading John's question because I'm stimulated by it because he's right there with us. Maybe you can read that. So my point on this is that you learn to flatten parts of the story. You don't eliminate it, but you flatten it. And again, always the question is, how does this serve me, both in meaning making for me, for internalization versus voicing my narrative to one or others. Okay, always keeping in mind the context. Back to you for reading the question,
Yeah,
Sir
John.
Joel.
Yeah, I use shame for both external and internal, and thank you for calling that, just clarifying that. Shame and guilt are two powerful parts of personality, have different impact. Guilt is experienced personally and internal. Shame is external, the gaze of others, and much more powerful. Your thoughts on that as it relates to our topic?
Yeah, I mean, I think in many cases, this is a pretty accurate description, right, John? So thank you for that.
Yes, John.
I think shame is, there is a social component to shame, right? Like we even think about you shame someone, right? Meaning that there's an external voice, and that external voice says, what you are or what you represent or what you're doing or what you're thinking isn't good enough. That there is a lack of sufficiency to who you're being or what's happening. But I do know that people have experienced that external become internal, where they feel embarrassed. But that does come from outside. But when you internalize it, it could then be this inner demonic voice, if you will, not to say that it's demonic, but telling you something that you're not good enough, right? And people sometimes call those demons or other voices. But, that's just a way to kind of walk your way through the conversation with yourself when you're not feeling as adequate. Again, we focus on the experiences that you are deeming are worth something. And by following the methodology, there's even part of the method that when you look at the ring of the experience, you might say, oh, this is a symbol that represents the experience that might have been considered not shameful or guilty, but not a good experience, we'll just say, in our lives. But when we think about what we learned about the people that were in it, geez, I didn't like these people in this workplace. They weren't kind. They weren't really good caregivers. They were all about the money. My motivation was to make money for myself, but also to, be a caregiver and a provider to others and nurture and help them. My competencies were exploration, receptivity, and also leadership and organization. I like to know how things work. And the place was in non-traditional school environments. Okay, cool. Well, if I look at all of that and I go to the energy ring on the outside, I can say, did that bring energy from me or take energy? Right? Was it negative or positive? And I can go around and I could be like, oh, even this negative thing is actually positive because what I learned from it is that I don't want to be around these people anymore. I want to be around all these environmental bits, the power of place. I want to use these skills, these motivations, or mental muscles in the state of, in this sense of competencies. But I definitely don't, these people don't share similar values. So sometimes even something that appears to be negative, after you dive into it and you use some of these tools that we provide, they're really designed to help sense making become more central to the experience as you unpack. You discover that even the negative has positive, right? Because they're still learning there.
Share the difference. By the way, can you show a cover of your book for folks that might be wanting to pick
Sure.
it up on Amazon? It's called Story Like You Mean It. And it's a personal narrative to illustrate who you really are by Dr. Dennis Rebelo. So folks, pick this book up. Now, many times people use storytelling to, before I do that, let's see what John has to say. The self is always in the process of composition and decomposition, and developing an adaptive sense of self is complex and subject to change without notice. Any
Yeah, no,
response to that?
I'm not the same person I was last year, right? You're not
Yes.
the same person when you and I met in Washington years ago.
Yeah.
I think that the difference is there's a continuum. Like when do I tell? Like there's the adaption that's happening, or the adaptability, or I'm evolving. We'll call it like evolving self, right? but then there's the taking stock of this sort of this provisional identity claim. So myself might be changing in the now en route to future. As I speak my future into the present, however, the past still anchors it. So there's some, right, I could still go back in and story sort elements of my life and say, this part of my life, I actually rethought it, and this element is more important, right? And that could be, to John's point, informed by the absorption of more content in my living currently, en route to some things that I have evolved in terms of my sort of table of things that matter, right? But the past and the present and the future are the connecting points of this evolving sense of self. So your sense of self is transient. There is a degree of permanence, though, however, right? Presuming I'm not, sort of flip-flopping in life and not doing proper self-reflection. Sometimes we experience people, so I love the question, I love the insight, I should say, but I would say that there tends to be some permanence, which is how you have a characterization of self. Because, I mean, imagine if you're watching a Netflix show or meeting somebody and their orientation to the world is so different in the next scene or in the next episode that you're like, I don't even know who this Joel character is.
Yeah.
So there is changing, but it's not like, you change wardrobes and hairstyles and you look like you're from a different scene in a different era, but it's usually more progressive and insight based. So if the person is doing self-reflection to claim the elements of one's life that, much like a good lawyer, is like evidentiary bits that inform the person as to how their narrative is taking shape. So I think that's the power of self-reflection, right? And as you look back in time and you do it well with detail and really radical receptivity and exploration and discernment, you can really take stock as an objective observer of oneself in articulating, shaping, and bending your narrative toward a future that you believe ought to be self-authored in a particular way. So these are great questions. I knew you had a smart audience, but I didn't realize how much fun it would be taking questions on the fly. So thanks, John.
How does storytelling differ from, let's say, storytelling to inspire or storytelling to lead? What are the subtleties or the layers of that?
Well, storytelling to lead typically is communication and leadership, right, together. So so these are different competencies. So I'll give you a bunch. So competencies are mental muscles. They're synonymous with that. We'll say it that way because it's easier for people to kind of understand what I'm about to say. Is that leadership is the opposite of receptivity. So leadership is directional. All leadership is influence, and all influence is leadership. If I'm being directional to one of my dogs, I might say down. I'm not being receptive. Receptive is the opposite psychological competency. Receptivity is openness. And, look at in your life, you've been with people who are open, right? I mean, you're a chaplain for the Rockets, right?
Bullets, Washington Bullets, Wizards.
Wizards. Sorry about that. I stand corrected. Oof.
I wish I was with the Rockets sometimes.
Yeah. Sorry about that. All you sports guys know. I'm just kidding. So one of the interesting parts of it is that, like, you had to be open, but if you were directional, that's the opposite. Now you can still be both, but not at the same moment in time. The other big set of competencies is discernment, right? Being analytical, clinging to distinctions that you see, whether you're an artist, whether you're in construction management, whether you're a professor, a rhetorician, a researcher, a jazz musician. They do lots of discerning, right? I mean, that's what you do. The opposite is adaptability. It's release, letting go. So another set is communication, organization, exploration, and creativity. These are 4 sets, in total 8. So when you're trying to lead by story, that's right. You can do it a lot of different ways. But if you're trying to inspire, right, that you're using communication with directionality and probably creativity, because there's a little author entertainer, which is communication and creativity. If you do that, but then it has to be directionality, because you want there to be focus. So sometimes you'll morph, to John's point, you'll go in and out of competency sets because you're becoming this. There's a sequence of competencies or mental muscles that can take your narrative and like tune it a little bit more. However, it shouldn't interfere with the essence of your story. If I wanted to lead somebody, it's just almost like an accent aigu in French. Like you're gonna, like it changes the E a little bit and the sound of the E, but it's still an E, right? So, but it has different meaning and it impacts how you hear it. So I think that, I never look at story as this is an important distinction in my body of work, as being something that I'm doing to get something. I'm doing it to understand something, and I'm doing it performatively, or as a performative effort, in a way that might bend a little bit, but it can't go away from the essence of the narrative, especially if it's a personalized narrative. If I'm doing an identity-based leadership program, that narrative shouldn't be so fly away from the narrative that the sheet music looks totally different now that it's being performed. If Take Five's written in 5/4 and it's a weird progressive way to do it at the time, it shouldn't sound like it should sound still progressive, even if Al Jarreau and Kurt Elling are going back and forth in that remarkable display of their version of Take Five. But it's different, but it's still Take Five. So it should be identifiable, Joel. So the narrative, you get me all worked up. I'm so excited with these questions. Should still be identifiable, but you got to check the essence. And is the essence there? Right? Is the essence there?
And we've got about maybe 5.5 minutes or so left.
Okay.
When it comes to vulnerability, what part does that play in storytelling? But first of all, let me see what Charlie has to say, and then we'll come back to that if we have time. It is much, much more complex to understand what any leader means because of the vague nature of language. For example, if I say the word ship, what am I referring to? You cannot know unless we ask the leader what they mean, what they meant, but we seldom get the opportunity for a moment of clarity,
So what I see in this question is that leaders have power, right? Whether it's position power or which is a form of legitimate power. There are like multiple power bases. And sometimes the power base is the culture of an organization, and the directionality as embodied by the leader prohibits or squelches somebody from asking for clarity. So you've got that operating just out of the gate. Then you have the leader actually using a communication stream that is words, and then you have to discern what the words are. And sometimes the words are actually veiled dominance. Like this is a kind of a funny thing, but if I said, it'd be really great if you passed the oat milk. It'd be phenomenal if you passed the oat milk when we were having coffee, Joel, in DC. Well, it's actually not phenomenal at all. I just need the oat milk. Why am I saying this? Because I'm veiling my dominance, because we're negotiating our relationship with another human being. So we have to think of, language as a window into social relations, and in leadership, in the leadership literature, relational leadership is probably what I would go to, Charlie, to think about how we're moving toward a more relational sense of leadership, where hierarchy isn't as important as the relational exchange. And there's more emphasis on what are called LMXs, or leader member exchanges, now in the literature, which has been emerging probably now for the last 9 years to 13 years, but this stuff takes sometimes 20 years to get to modern practice. So yes, definitely language is vague. You have to have some courage in leading up. You have to be able to also lead as a follower or as a non-senior person. And you can do that through creativity. Is the competency usually that I encourage people to use.
Thank you, Charlie. And thank you, Dennis.
You're welcome.
What part does vulnerability play? What role does that play in storytelling?
Well, it's a big role, right? Because I'm unveiling, elements of my life to you. But, there's something called the Johari window in psychology, which is like allows for the back and forth to flow. I tell you a little, you tell me a little.
Yeah.
Like, positive revealing is super helpful. And there's a neat diagram on my the nonprofit that I helped start, called Narrative Research Group. If you go to the research section, there's a really good behavior over time graph on how narrative works when there's an intentional narrative and what it does to generate relational empathy, dialogue, and cultural consciousness. Pardon me. That comes from formal research. It's really something that we had in the data / information from these phenomenological interviews, and it was part of the phenomenological reduction. So vulnerability is key. It leads to relational empathy, but you need receptivity to really start the sequence of good competencies in this equation. If your story is part of that, it can create what Fukuyama called spontaneous sociability. In his book Trust, he doesn't refer to my work in it because my work came after it. But Fukuyama talks about trust and how trust is a form of spontaneous sociability. And if your narrative is constructed well, it is a way forward to bridge to that kind of state differently than Fukuyama said, but still get there.
Mm-hmm. Now, if someone reads your book, Story Like You Mean It, and they have one takeaway, what is the one thing you hope is that they walk away with after reading your book?
Well, that they probably want to be somebody, right? And they are somebody, and that there's some sort of self-affirming takeaway that they're bringing more energy to their life. Look, today we spoke in some cases very academically, very discerningly, very exactingly, but the book is made to be read and followed as a guide, not to be showcasing, literature review of a particular body of work. Although there are, quite a few references in the back of the book, they're not placed in the book in a way to take away from the act of creating a narrative. So your narrative, when you meet somebody, so I'm going to answer the question this way as well. You either take energy from the interaction, or it takes energy away from you, right? I meet you, Joel. I meet Jonathan. The meeting either brought me energy or it took energy away from me. So what is your story doing? What is someone else's story doing? And can you model, positive identity narrative work through a story? Absolutely, you can. And if you follow this narrative formula, whether it's true to the Forbes claim 1,000 times more fun than your last public speaking event, I'm not sure. But I hope that it guides you to take stock of the life you led, to the place you are, en route to the place you're going, and that imagine variations of the work that you start with the book continues to move you to a place of engagement in life, right? That provides a bit of an aura about you. And Charlie has one more last question. Let's.
We have no time for it. Actually, we gotta move.
Let's let it go.
Charlie,
All right.
Sorry about that.
Sorry, Charlie. Really, sorry, Charlie. Yeah,
Dennis,
I apologize.
Dennis,
yeah.
Thank you so much for taking time out of your crazy schedule to be with us, and really appreciate you. Thank you.
Yeah, appreciate you as well, Joe. Take good care.
You have just experienced another episode of the Mischief Maker broadcast. Hit the subscribe button. Connect at chiefmischiefmaker.com. Thanks for coming along for the ride. And hopefully, you are now a bit closer to becoming a mischief maker in your part of the world.